A heat wave took over the Midwest when I was living in Chicago in July 1995. It was a Wednesday, and at first it wasn't anything really that unusual. Temps were in the mid-90s, and it was incredibly humid, just bordering on intolerable. You know, it was the kind of day when you go all in on that commitment. If you bump into someone, you're gonna say, hey, how's about that weather? You know, never mind that you're boring yourself the minute the words come out of your mouth, but holy crap, it was hot, and it felt weird to not acknowledge it. And we all figured, we'll stop talking about it soon enough. Except, we didn't. By Thursday, the temperature was hovering at around 105 degrees. Then factor in all the brick buildings, cement surfaces, tar roofs, air pollution, and the humidity. It felt like 125 degrees. It was so hot, the city could not cool down overnight. There was no rain in sight, and just the heat island effect was in full blast, and it was suffocating. Everyone was just miserable because everything about daily life just felt off. Getting on a jam-packed bus to go home during rush hour felt like a terrible idea. Getting off that same air-conditioned bus to walk home felt like a terrible idea. My God, having ideas felt like a terrible idea. I didn't think it could get any worse. So once I was released from work on a Friday afternoon, I already had my weekend agenda planned. I was going to sweat, and I was going to complain, and I was going to stay inside and air conditioned as much as possible. But it didn't work out that way. That afternoon, multiple ComEd transformers had blown, and my north side apartment was one of the unlucky 50,000 households that lost power. And this was a bad, bad apartment to suffer through a summer blackout. My boyfriend and I lived just blocks away from Wrigley Field. So, you know, drunk baseball fans swarm the area. It's a really, really good area if you're into petty crime. So the landlords were smart to look for ways to keep the first floor tenants safe from break-ins. The landlords were not smart to have solved this problem by nailing the windows shut. So yeah, you heard that I just said that, but I'm gonna say it again. They had nailed our windows shut. So our only choice was to stay in the living room with the back door open and a flimsy screen door latched and just wait for the electricity to come back on. Any minute now, right? Nope, didn't come back on Friday night. We stayed on the couch all night, so irritated by the feeling of fabric on our skin. And we maybe dozed off for a second here and there, but for the most part, we were awake, and we talked until we were so crabby that we couldn't stand each other's voices and couldn't stand our own. Saturday, the temps went back down to the high 90s. Still no electricity. My mom's apartment was just a couple miles directly west from us. She and her husband had spent Friday night without power also, but theirs was back on by Saturday afternoon. And she called to let us know we could stay with them until ours was back on. Hooray! Saved! Immediate please and thank you, and I'll be there in 5 minutes, right? Okay, well, yeah, here's the thing. I was a cigarette smoker, and even at age 24, I was still trying to hide it from her. Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous. But hear me out. Her mother was a heavy, heavy smoker who died when my mom was 22, and she converted this heartbreak into her life's work. In fact, she worked for the Chicago Lung Association. She wrote the citywide Stop Smoking campaign that was published in the Chicago Tribune. And here's me, her youngest, got cigarette curious, tried one, loved it, and now had a pack a day habit. If it was an attempt at rebellion, I certainly was doing it all wrong, because doesn't the aggrieved party need to know that the rebellion is happening for it to count? Since my habit really took root when I was away at college, and I seemed to always pair off romantically with smokers, I'd become pretty good at hiding it. And since my nicotine addiction was fierce, and I was already such a crab ass about the past few days we'd had, I knew a sleepover would mean a full throttle withdrawal meltdown. And I couldn't not smoke. So I gave the excuse, oh, I can't leave my dog alone in this heat, and you can't have dogs at your apartment anyway. And she insisted her landlords would understand that it was an emergency situation, and I insisted, it's only been 24 hours. It's coming back on. Any minute now. But it didn't. The only lights on in our neighborhood were at the ballpark. I discovered this while out walking my dog. I was already so dragged out, all heat and no sleep. I just about lost my mind when I saw it. All lit up. I may have yelled out loud and to no one who could actually do anything about it that the Cubs could cram their generator and I hope they lose. So we stayed up all Saturday night on the back deck, smoking all the cigarettes. We were trying to find the humor in it, but there was none to be found. And my resentment at this problem that I had created for myself was becoming as durable as this blackout, which was still going strong in our neighborhood on Sunday morning. So you've probably already done the technology math by now. It was 1995. We had no internet such as it is now. We didn't have cell phones really, let alone smartphones. So it wasn't until I bought a Sunday paper that I found out what had been happening. And the situation was so much worse than I realized. So the city had issued a heat advisory during the week, and they didn't call it an emergency until late Saturday morning. Emergency rooms were overwhelmed by heat illnesses, so hospitals one by one stopped accepting new patients. By the time the newspaper went to print, 300 people all over the city had died. Most of them were low-income and elderly individuals who thought that they would be safest if they stayed at home with fans on. This mass casualty put the morgue at capacity, and they started holding bodies in refrigerated trucks. It was shocking that the city could misjudge this turn of events so badly, and I was so mad for all the families whose loved ones died. And I was so mad at myself. I'd been so committed to that one risky behavior that I put myself at even bigger risk for far worse. It wasn't until 8 o'clock Monday morning that our power came back on. I called in sick to work so I could catch up on sleep, but I didn't sleep for long. The temperatures were down to the mid-80s, and I just wanted to be outside. So this wasn't the first time that Chicago had a heat wave like this. There were a few stretches of extreme heat in the first half of the 20th century, but the heat island effect during a heat wave of this magnitude was unprecedented. All told, 500 deaths were unprecedented. If there's an upside to be found, it's that the city and the National Weather Service collaborated after this to update the heat watch and warning criteria. The city also improved its emergency communication and coordination. And these improvements may very well have been why the July 1999 heat wave only saw 80 fatalities. And in the July 2012 heat wave, there were only 2. In August 2005, Hurricane Katrina all over the news. It was starting to become clear to the public that the severe consequences of the Chicago heat wave were no anomaly. It was starting to come into focus that without meaningful change in our collective habits, natural disasters would likely keep ending with consequences way more severe than they needed to be. But it's only gotten worse because meaningful change in our collective habits still has not come. Now, I had been toying with my own meaningful change in personal habits right at about the same time Katrina happened. For 17 years, I had loved smoking way too much to even consider stopping. It was part of my identity, part of my daily ritual, an easy way to bond with people, and an easy way to de-stress. I was never unaware of the damage I was doing, but I couldn't live anymore in this make-believe world that I was only hurting myself and that these consequences didn't matter. It was becoming incredibly expensive. I constantly was coughing. I didn't exercise. Let's face it, I smelled really bad. I regretted all the litter and pollution that I had generated over the years. I didn't want to quit. I just knew that I had to. In September 2005, I did it. Thanks for the applause, because I gotta tell you, I hated everything about quitting. On some days, it almost felt like I was mourning the loss of a best friend. So I'm not going to pretend that change isn't hard. But once I got myself to see that I had a choice between habit and survival, I had to choose change. Thank you.